documentation given to me by the prosecution is exonerating, they say I'm making a political speech and that my defense lacks substance. And when I devote more time than the prosecution and the victims together to legal arguments and challenging the evidence, they say I'm nitpicking. Well, fortunately, we have this honourable bench which appreciates the presumption of innocence and the need to examine the evidence thoroughly in order to examine whether the prosecution has proved its case to the required standard. We are fortunate in that we have this honourable bench to review the various arguments dispassionately and professionally. And we know that this honourable bench, despite our struggling with the various redactions that have considerably reduced our ability to make comprehensive submissions in open session, we know that this bench will assess our arguments faithfully. We have provided a comprehensive analysis of both the law and the charged incidents. We have attacked every single count in open session while doing our very best to respect the restrictions imposed. In public record from the public version of the pre-confirmation brief so that the whole world can appreciate it. And the same goes for the redactions applied to the identities and roles of the various criminal cooperating participants. While I found this unfair and contrary to the spirit of transparency, which is meant to govern the conduct of the proceedings at this institution, I approached my counterpart in the prosecution and complained that the nature of his redactions would mean that most of my meaningful submissions, namely the attack on the evidence substantiating the 78 deaths, would require me to go into closed session. Don't worry, I was told by the learned prosecutor. We're going to release a lesser redacted version of our charging document and confirmation brief. Wonderful, I said to myself. But what in due course did we get? A document which merely released the names of the 8 so-called co-perpetrators and which caused a storm in the Philippines. It even caused the Secretary of the Interior to state that his department had begun tracing the whereabouts of these so-called co-perpetrators. And in its lesser redacted version of the document containing the charges and pre-confirmation brief, the prosecution also released the names of certain high-profile victims which it had selected, thereby enabling it, and it alone, to talk freely in open session about certain incidents that it felt crucial to its case. From this, I submit, Your Honours, you can really appreciate the true inequality of arms facing the defence as it attempts to defend a client in the public eye, I stress in the public eye, at the International Criminal Court. This inequality of arms in the public eye expresses itself in the way the prosecution controls the narrative by arbitrarily lifting redactions so that it can make its narrative of a grand scheme of co-perpetration known to the public in open court, while the defence can only meaningfully attack the real meat and the substance of the charges either obliquely or in closed session, including that hotly disputed incident with the CCTV. Well, we hope that we have found a way around that by referring Your Honours to the relevant places in the evidence, and we do trust you to pick up on the problems without the benefit of our full explanations in open session, even if the remaining part of our plea was rendered rather dry. But I do assure you, the general weaknesses that we have identified pervade throughout and are so recurring that the total value of the prosecution's evidentiary matrix drops not just below the substantial grounds threshold that the prosecution must meet, but hits the very rock-hard bottom. And I will summarise these weaknesses once more for the record. Layered hearsay, conjecture, over-reliance on accomplice evidence with offers of virtual immunity at the ICC, contradicting statements between participants in a crime, absolute lack of any linkage whatsoever to Mr. Rodrigo Duterte, and the total lack of support for an alleged crime, both in the documentary and forensic record. And regarding these documents, it is not enough to argue that the Duterte administration destroyed them. There is absolutely no evidence for that. It is an outrageously unsubstantiated accusation which is not alleged, and where the documentation does exist, the prosecution is quite happy to rely on it. But what is this threshold, this substantial grounds to believe threshold? Well, clearly it is not beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the standard required for a conviction at trial. But it is considerably more than reasonable grounds to believe, which is the standard applied for the issuance of an arrest warrant. If I may, let us take the analogy introduced by Mr. Butuya, that boat of his that set sail in order to avoid leaving his victims stranded on an island. Your Honours, this boat is the confirmation process, and its captain is this honourable bench. We are all passengers in this boat. The favourable winds in the sea and in the sails are for the prosecution, the incriminating evidence, and the sharks and the rocks in shallow waters are the exonerating evidence, the hearsay, the contradictions, and the accomplice witnesses. I ask you to consider how many sharks and rocks that we have discovered and pointed out to you through our binoculars. Would you board that boat if you knew that there was substantial grounds to believe that the boat would sink if it encountered one of the aforementioned perils? Let me define the test using more strictly legal language. The evidentiary standard applicable, namely substantial grounds to believe, is met with respect to a discrete incident when, and I quote from paragraph 38 of the Said confirmation decision, there exists concrete and tangible proof demonstrating a clear line of reasoning underpinning the specific allegations. By way of parenthesis, I should state that this quote from the Said confirmation decision recognizes the fact that each pleaded incident in a document containing the charges must be proved to the requisite standard for it to be adduced at trial. And that is what we request the Honourable Pre-Trial Chamber to consider. I have been asked by the many journalists who literally mobbed me outside this court building whether I have been reporting on the proceedings to the former president. And I tell them, yes, of course, that's my duty as a lawyer. I have to report to my client. It would be unethical otherwise. And they ask me, what has he to say about the case? Well, I'm going to enlighten you all a bit. For the best part of a year, we have been litigating the issue of jurisdiction and fitness. Your Honours have delivered your rulings. However, even though you found him capable of standing to tell you just a little bit about what really goes on in prison, no more than a